I think that the real story here is one of technological disruption and
Hmm.
and really basic business strategy, where you have the tribe of the union. They're there to protect themselves. They're there to gather as many resources as they can for themselves, which is completely reasonable and a fair thing to do, and totally support that behavior. And you have to be able to produce something of value at a price that can produce actual resources. And I think what they are just generally missing is that they're missing the basic business strategy of the auto industry or of any industry.
This week, the hosts of What I See, Mark O'Donnell and Louis Schiff, went mano a mano in discussing the twin strikes looming over American society, the auto strike and the Hollywood writers' strike. Both are pitched battles over two beloved aspects of American life, the cars we drive and the TV and movies we watch. Mark and I wanted to discuss which matters most, the humanity and dignity of work and workers, or the relentless drive to innovate to make the things we consume even better. Find out on What I See, conversations with innovators, visionaries, and entrepreneurs.
Welcome to What I See, the podcast where we uncover the stories of visionaries, innovators, and entrepreneurs. Join us as we explore the big ideas and challenges shaping our future. And now our hosts, Mark O'Donnell and Louis Schiff.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Louis, how are you?
Good. This is the second time I get to hang out with you this week.
That is true. Yeah, the first time at Rider University, hanging out
Where
with
you
you and
were,
Norm and a bunch of
where
college
you were
students.
shaping young minds. You
That's
were
right.
setting our young people on a course for their future with your wisdom.
Or future destruction, whichever,
I mean, two of them have been arrested since your presentation, but whatever.
Well, that would not be, if that actually happened, I would believe it, yes.
I thought you were going to say I will pay their legal bills, but that's not what you meant.
No, they made their own decision. It was their fault for listening to me, and, I take
No,
no.
actually, I'm going to say a compliment to you and to Norm Brodsky, my business partner and my mentor. So Norm's been kind of a eminence grise of entrepreneurship for decades. But one of his great qualities is that he always shows up to things as a student. He always brings some paper and pencil. He takes notes. Doesn't matter what the situation. And you will be happy to hear that after that event, I saw him the next day. As you know, that was Tuesday. On
Mhm.
Wednesday, we have Whiskey Wednesday in Brooklyn. So we were gathered. And he said he could not stop thinking about some of the things you said, including the 6 qualities of an entrepreneur that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And he said he really thought about them. He learned things. It awoke, awoken. What's the word? It awoke. It wokened. It wokened. It made him
Awakened?
aware. Awakened. It awakened some things he's never thought about in terms of his own way that he shows up as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and we should have Norm on the podcast. Maybe he should
Yeah.
join us on a regular basis. I think that would be fun if he's up for it.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely up for it.
Yeah.
So with that, you and I were talking about things that are on our minds as the co-captains of What I See,
Yeah.
conversations with innovators, visionaries, and entrepreneurs. And we got to talking about this highly disruptive moment in time, the twin strikes taking place in America on two huge parts of the way we live our lives: cultural, with the writers actors strike in Hollywood, and the way we get around, and of course our love of cars with the auto strike. And as we just began to talk about it, you said this is good fodder for our podcast. Let's talk about it then.
Yeah, and I think it is. So today, Friday, September 22nd, at noon, we'll find out what happens with the UAW, if they're going to increase the strike. I think they've got about 10% of the 150,000 people who work inside of the auto industry and they're a member of a union. So about 10% are on strike now, have left work, and they're going to increase that on a periodic basis as they're not making progress with their negotiations. But I think, union, non-union, none of that really matters from my perspective. And as you mentioned, the writers' strike, you see people like Bill Maher saying he's going to come back, and they got back at the negotiating table, so he stopped that, and Drew Barrymore doing the same thing with her talk show. So people are sort of starting to want to come back to work. But I think the reality is it's being disrupted by technology. And this has happened over and over again all throughout history. These disruptive technologies come in. It disrupts the underpinning of whatever society is at that particular time. And I think it's inevitable. We just happen to be in that spot. And I think it's interesting because when you think about from an entrepreneurial perspective, and you think about you're an entrepreneur, you have a product or service that you are selling in the marketplace. It has to provide value at a fair price. That their willingness to pay is at a certain level that is below your cost of production, right? And that margin allows you to invest and produce something of even more value to increase their willingness to pay even more. So what I think is that is interesting for entrepreneurs with the strike is that that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about basic business strategy, and in a competitive environment, in a competitive economy where monopolies are generally frowned upon, you must reduce costs in order to be competitive. And you have to provide value over and above that cost. And that's just the way of it. And so what you're seeing to me is a conflict between value creation and cost.
Well, let me take it from a totally different side, and then we'll come
Yeah.
back to that general thing. Yes to everything you said. And yes, that is the job of the entrepreneur, of the creator of a company, the person who marshals capital to build things. The other thing that capitalism does is it asks tens or hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of people to show up at work every day, do their part, and then leave at the end of the day, and then they're paid for their time. And then they use that money to pay their rent and their grocery, etc.
Yeah.
And so when we think of unions and I think of those hundreds of thousands of workers, I think, everything you said about how things change and how companies reinvest in the future is true. And those 150,000 people are not really a significant part of that conversation. They more or less enjoy the relationship where as long as they like to do it, they'll do what they're told. They add their value and then leave at the end of the day and they can pay their rent bill. And so when these disruptions happen, those people are disrupted.
They are.
And that's where this pain comes from, writer's strike, auto strike, where the ways that customers say, I want to pay for things, the ways that entrepreneurs or, the owners of capital say they want to charge for things. And then there's this last group called the workers. And they are last in line because obviously we don't know what to tell them what to do until we know what they should do. But in the meantime, there's a kind of general bargain between worker and employer is, hey, I'll show up and do what you tell me to do, and then you'll give me my pay at the end of the week. And then it's all getting challenged in real time by innovation. And these workers, men and women, are at the whip tail of this whole thing, and it's just tough.
And I would say by choice, right? They're free to opt in or opt out of that environment. You can go back to since it's auto, go back to the days of turn of the century, the last one,
Right.
and there's livery stable workers. There's an entire system that is set up to take care of horses and remove manure, and um, all those individuals who were working in that area had to completely change and create new capabilities, learn new things, and adapt to their environment. And this is no different. And if you look at the United States in general, you have the southern states, where there are non-union auto workers. You have, like, you look at the top 10 vehicles that are produced today that are for sale in the United States. The top 10 most American made cars are not any of the three big automakers that the UAW is striking against. Tesla is the highest selling, most American made vehicle. They have the highest percentage of American made parts and assembly and everything else. And they have 5 times profit per car than any of the big three, because there's obviously employees there. They're adapting to reducing costs, selling a product people love, without artificially trying to set a price floor, which makes Tesla, and their plan is to cut the cost of production by 50% over the next few years. So you're going to be able to buy a car for way cheaper that is better. And the people working in those facilities, they've just adapted. And again, southern states, non-union, they get paid about the same. So the 150,000 UAW workers and the general environment there in the northern states, they're just setting themselves up for a non-competitive situation. And if people start to think about themselves as the business of one and take responsibility for their own outcomes, that opportunity is exciting.
Right, and I hear you, and I'm kind of partly playing devil's advocate here because
Yeah,
I've
for
often
sure.
wondered why people, people can move to anywhere. Not only can they move to a different state, right? This is getting even bigger than the original topic, but there's 50
Yeah,
states, which means there's 50 experiments, right? Alabama's allowed to have its laws, and New York's allowed to have its laws,
yeah,
and those laws spring from cultural beliefs in some instances.
yeah.
And so you could say, hey, I just more aligned with Alabama, or I'm more aligned with New York, or you name it. But that's not really what happens. Putting aside the cost of moving, leaving that entirely aside, people just don't leave their people. They just don't leave their people, which
Right,
is
they
their
don't.
family and their friends. And
Yeah,
so if there's a better opportunity for an auto worker who's currently residing in Michigan to go down to Tennessee and join what you're describing here in terms of the non-union auto work movement, they just don't do it too often because
right.
it's just too uprooting to their lives and to their way of life.
Yeah.
It suggests that people are a little bit like chess pieces, that they could just be moved. But I wonder about that. I wonder about people who are not well received in America. Have they ever thought about going to other countries where they would be better received? Like why not go where you want, where you believe in the same things other people believe? And of course, it's just so hard to do.
It's very hard to do, and if you think about the evolutionary migration patterns of humans all throughout history, and there's archaeological finds that prove all this to the degree that we can. None of this is out of the ordinary. People would just pick up and move when the food ran out. This is not something that is new. It is not unique in any way. It's not the first time this has ever happened. And you look at the Rust Belt throughout, New York and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan. It's the Rust Belt because the food has dried up, and some people stayed, most people left. The populations have declined. They call it the Rust Belt because it's fallen apart, not because it's thriving and growing. And that's just the way life is. Life is not fair, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, and that's the sort of fundamental promise of America: is it's a winner-take-all society. And one of the easiest ways to think about this, often comparison, is to, let's say, Scandinavian countries, where there's a lot more support, even if you're not a winner. Um, and so you can decide to decamp to a Scandinavian country where you can sort of
Sure.
opt out of a lot of the kind of crazy competitive, hey, if you don't have the right skill set at the right time, you're screwed kind of approach of America.
Mhm.
But they don't. They don't. Of course, I mean, I don't know anybody who's very American, has nothing to do with Scandinavia, who's moved to Scandinavian countries because they said, "Oh, that's a better fit for me." Easier to move from Michigan to Tennessee, probably, um, but so your kind of point here is you as an individual, even if you have a family, you've got obligations. You need to think like an entrepreneur. You need to act like an entrepreneur, and you need to take risks, and you need to figure out where your skill set is most valuable, and that's the best fit for who you are.
I do to a certain degree. I don't think it's necessarily like an entrepreneur. I think it's more about taking, at least take responsibility for your own survival. Um, no one else is going to
But
do that for you.
But groups
But
do gather, groups do assemble to take care of each other's survival. I mean,
no
a
doubt.
supermarket brings 1,000 types of food to your town and very complicated food supply chains to make sure that you have things that you're in Pennsylvania right now. A whole community has come together to bring things together that are beyond just what your family can provide, like an entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I
So
mean that
a union is that, right? A union is
a
a,
tribe.
a collection of a tribe of people who say we're going to help protect for the collective us.
Absolutely. And I think that the real story here is one of technological disruption and
Mm-hmm.
really basic business strategy, where you have the tribe of the union. They're there to protect themselves. They're there to gather as many resources as they can for themselves, which is completely reasonable and a fair thing to do, and totally support that behavior. And you have to be able to produce something of value at a price that can produce actual resources. And I think what they are just generally missing is that they're missing the basic business strategy of the auto industry or of any industry. You got to produce something of absolute value at a cost that is way lower than well, you got to sell it at a price that is lower than it took to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, you won't be able to create value and sell it for a price that anyone can make a profit. And even if you remove profit as the driver, like you think about China as an example, where employment is the driver for of entrepreneurship or of businesses in China. It's not to make a profit, it's simply to employ humans. And so you end up with a just a completely different world where the quality of things are much lower. You have lots of disruption. The quality of life ends up to be just lower because people don't have the freedom um, to make a profit, to reinvest, and to
Mm-hmm.
compete for the preferences of a group. So, my encouragement to any entrepreneur in the conversation, sort of observing this, is to really think about how can I produce more value at a lower price. That's what they're competing against. They're not competing against, all the news is around foreign automakers coming in. Like, no, they are already here, and they're actually producing a better product for a lower cost, and therefore they can sell it at a slightly lower price, and they will win the day because that's just basic economics. Tesla, I think, is the absolute best strategic case with this is that, again, they make 5 times more profit per vehicle than Ford, GM, or Chevrolet.
And that's reflected in the share price. That's reflected in how the owners of that company have been rewarded. Things like that.
Absolutely. And, you think about, so Elon Musk, there's a Walter Isaacson biography coming out, or it's actually already out. And I didn't really start reading it yet, but I'm super curious. But he always talks about first principles and kind of the points of what first principles are is questioning every single requirement, deleting any and all parts of a process that you can, just completely just hit delete, simplifying and optimizing everything to just an extreme degree, accelerating the cycles of development so you can test with check writers to actually test and test and test and find that exact product market fit, and then automate everything you can. And the result of those first principles is something that people love at a price they think is ridiculously low compared to the value they're getting. And it's
And
that relentless pursuit that's why they're winning.
is it possible that both the owners of shares in, let's say, GM or Ford, or the workers of GM or Ford or Stellantis, can all decide that to some extent they're opting out of those first principles a bit? They're saying, let's make good cars, not great cars. Let's make some profit, not the most profit. Let's create employment for hundreds of thousands. And the net result is all the things that it really is right now. In other words, could they consciously choose the path they've chosen? Or is capitalism so relentless that it only allows for the winner to win?
Well, I think because of the threat to labor and politicians having their own incentives, that something will occur to stop that free market from happening. Some regulation, I think that Elon Musk is going to have a target on his back, if he doesn't already, he probably already does, where Tesla is going to need to be stopped in some way because of if they are free to pursue first principles, cutting the cost of the production, producing something that people like better,
With fewer workers.
with significant, I mean, basically a fraction, and that's obviously reflected in the low cost to produce. That I think that people will be incentivized to try to stop that. Because what I see with Ford and GM and Stellantis is the relentless pursuit of mediocrity.
Right. But again, and I, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. In
Yeah,
exchange for employment,
in exchange for
mediocrity
employment.
in exchange for employment. So that
Yeah.
that third constituency, right? There's shareholders, there's customers, and then there's workers. In that pie, it just leans a little more towards the worker slice than, let's say, at Tesla, which says our pie slices are shareholders and customers primarily.
Hmm.
Yeah. Let's. Oh, sorry. Last thought on this, because I want to switch to the writer's strike a bit and see how that matches and mirrors.
Yeah. I guess the kind of last thing I would just say, and as people are thinking about this and thinking how they can apply it to their business, um, everyone is better off to the degree that you pursue excellence. Your quality of life goes up, everyone's quality of life goes up because you're creating something new and valuable in the world, as opposed to trying to hoard scarce resources.
Well, then let me ask as a part of that last thought. Can that relentless pursuit of better bring along workers in some way that values them as highly as customers and owners?
Yes, and it would be helping every human as on an individual basis uh, work in a place that they feel valuable, that they are valuable, they're fulfilled, they are learning new skills, new capabilities, and not. I think that Seth Godin talks about tribes, and it's been long documented that a tribe size is about 150. Right, that's kind of like the number of people that can
Right.
move together, and you can generally represent their interests really well. but we're talking about 150,000 people. That's not a tribe, right? Every single worker inside of the 150,000 people inside the UAW do not share and have the same unique capabilities and desires and wants at the same time. Like, that's just not a thing. So I think it's just too big of a group to even worry about. So I think to the degree that they actually begin caring about each individual human on a human level and not thinking of it in a group, those workers, and I don't even like talking about workers as a group, because it feels demeaning and sort of like, it doesn't seem appropriate to say, oh, the workers as like an object. Like, no, they're people with unique capabilities and desires and purpose. And so I think to the degree that you can allow them to be free and have the autonomy to pursue mastery, whatever that is, on their own individual right, we're doing the right thing, and sort of that free market will work itself out.
Well, that's a tough. I'll call them workers for a moment because they're not part of the conversation around how innovation takes place. That generally speaking, they provide a skill, they provide some kind of labor, and the owners, managers have decided what that skill and labor is. I mean, in other words, it's a lot to. I get your point 100%. That worker class is not part of the innovation conversation, really, and the idea of providing them with meaningful and fulfilling work assumes that the owners have already figured out where things are going. Like, we need to build cars like this, or we need to do this. When in fact, the very nature of innovation is also like a lot, there's fog, there's lack of clarity, there's experimentation, there's failure. And so the worker is asked to come along for that ride. And sometimes they could be told in the year 2022, you should become really good at this. And then by 2024, they're being told, yeah, that didn't really matter. That's not important. We're actually going to go this other direction. And the worker gets a bit whipped around in that innovation journey.
I think that's a choice, though. I think it's a choice. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's no other guarantees. If you think about every person as an individual, they're saying, I have X amount of time. This looks attractive to me, so I'm going to go join and do this particular job because it seems like a fair exchange of value for my time. You're choosing to opt into that, or you choose to opt out.
Okay. Now let's switch to the writers' strike, writers
Yeah.
and actors, and this is about people who, work with their minds. Of course, a lot of laborers work with their minds a lot, but
Yeah.
this is people who primarily and almost entirely work with their minds, and they, their job is to, it's what great comedians do. It's what great writers do. They sort of capture the moment. They help us understand where we are. They make a sitcom about family life. They make a drama about, heroism, and they make us feel. And it's a lot of how a lot of us get through our lives is by watching something that makes us feel a little different than we do during our 8 hours of work. And that group of people who are charged with making us feel things at night when we catch a few hours of television, are on strike because they are not happy with the way they are being compensated as distribution changes from cable, which is almost in free fall, really, to streaming, which is ascendant. So what's your take on that phenomenon? And also, since we've been talking a lot about the workers' role, on that phenomenon and the workers' role in that process, and what they should be asking for, or what's happening to them.
Yeah, and it's funny, I was having a conversation a little bit about this with my brother, and he was talking about the NFL running backs. Right now in the NFL, running backs are not paid nearly as much as they used to. They're sort of banding together and saying, "Hey, we want more money." And the NFL is basically saying, well, that's nice. You're just not as valuable as you used to be. Why is that? Well, because the system changed and the offenses have changed.
Hmm.
Um, a running back is simply not, it doesn't put butts in seats anymore.
Hmm.
It's not as flashy. It's not a sexy thing to carry the ball and go 3 yards. And, if you get 4.5 yards every time you touch the ball, you get into the Hall of Fame as a running back. Like, that's a pretty boring thing. And so humans just simply don't value the performance of most running backs.
Hmm.
And I would just say that's the same thing with the writers' strike. Is the reality is you just aren't as valuable as you once were, and therefore no one is willing to pay you what you believe you should be. And I mean that's just a cold, hard truth about it, and I feel bad about that. But as Charles Darwin made famous, it's not survival of the fittest; it's those that are most adaptable to change. And so they just have to adapt.
So, okay, so this question goes to both the writers and the auto strike. Is there are times when the owners start to make tons and tons of money. It doesn't necessarily go on forever. There could be these great years, though, 2, 3, 4, X numbers of years, where
Yeah.
the owners make lots and lots of money. Do you think any of that is supposed to correlate to the writers, or it's more like, the system of negotiating is what it is, and you're either going to negotiate well or you're not?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just a cold, hard reality of any system where, okay, you have these owners, own property, and that could be a business or whatever that produces a particular value. And if they figure out a way to increase their overall profit or revenue and therefore profit by reducing costs, um, good for them. They're entitled to it. They've created something in value that no longer includes those that labor, and that is the reality. And I don't know, people don't like to hear that because nobody really wants to be told, well, you used to be valuable, but you're not anymore. And the reason is because, and at the same time, I'm doing much better than uh, you because I figured out how to not need you anymore.
Right. Well, when we talk about the auto stuff, we're talking about there's non-union, there's companies made overseas, there's companies made as close as Mexico, and it's all about how labor can move. And then there's also the Tesla argument, which is a robot can do what a person used to do.
Yeah.
In the writers' strike, it seems like they're not talking about saying, "Oh, if you won't write our sitcoms, we're going to go to Mexico to have our sitcoms written, or we're going to go to Asia to get our sitcoms written." It's we're going to get a computer to get our sitcoms written.
Yeah.
So the real enemy there is not another worker somewhere who's willing to accept less. It's tech. It's AI.
Yeah.
So again, just to compare the two for a moment, auto strike versus Hollywood strike. Do you think the auto strike isn't really about union versus non-union, Asia versus America? Is it really about robots versus workers, just like it is in Hollywood?
I think it all goes down to technology as a vehicle for there's and I can't remember, so it's Moore's law that the speed of computers doubles every 2 years. And I think that there's what we're seeing now is the cost of everything is because of technology and the microchip. At the same time, the speed is increasing at a doubling. I think we're seeing the cost of everything decreasing over time. I mean, if you think about and what's in an iPhone right now, if you roll, I mean, we've got a music player, we've got video cameras, we've got a communication device, we have the ability to connect to satellites, we have a GPS mapping system, we have email communication systems, we have social media networks, we can pay our bills, it's a bank, it can have crypto on it. The Apple chip can have a large language model on some of the chips. And you can get the whole thing for $1,000. where if you go back 50 years ago, if you wanted to buy all those things separately, it would, take acres and acres of space, and it would cost tens of millions of dollars. So the cost just keeps coming down through technological innovation. And that's inevitable. You can't stop it. It's going to continue to really both demonetize and dematerialize as we go. Air travel is the same way. Interestingly, in like 1820s, 1830s, people, when the sun went down, everyone would just go to bed because what else? And not very many people had candles because they're super expensive. You go back a little further, it was made out of whale blubber, and it was really, really expensive to have a candle in your house. And so you were super wealthy if you could have a candle and read at night. And if you happen to have a book, which was that alone was really difficult to get your hands on, all 10 that were made that year. Like starting at the printing press, this went and light and refrigeration, like all these things we take for granted now. We're just continuously in this process of, we have an LED light that costs pennies in comparison to what we make. 150 years ago, to have a candle would take your month's income to read a book at night when the sun goes down.
And the book would take a month.
And the book would take years probably of income to be able to afford one of them. And I got these, cost $10. I could have got them, digitally for half the price. I just like the way they look on a shelf. I like the mess. So I just think this is just a continuous process. And because we are so connected, we are paying attention to these things a lot more because we're inundated with all these messages about all these things. So I think with whether you're the writers or the auto workers, you're just a cog in the historical, never-ending wheel of technology creating a world in which things get cheaper and cheaper over time. And ultimately, while it might feel like they're losing right now, humanity wins in the long run. Everyone's quality of life is, even if you go back 50 years ago, our quality of life is just so much better, but we get caught in a comparison trap, and so we're comparing ourselves to other people around us, and it doesn't feel that way. But study history, and you quickly find that this is not unique, it's not unusual, and we're better off.
Now, as sort of a wrapping up concept, notwithstanding everything, you've basically advocated for the power of innovation and capitalism for our time today. You and I work with a lot of entrepreneurs whose companies sell something that's really great and relatively new. And when you sit and talk with them over a cup of coffee, they say, the problem is the change management piece. I've got a better widget, but my customers have 100 workers in each of their sites, and the workers are slow to adopt. And so, there's so much stuff out there that actually is better. It's just that there's a group of people. Okay, well, let's just, in this case, we're calling them workers, but there's also customers can do the same thing, who just don't want to change. And they just become that friction to innovation. And do you think that do you have any kind of moral or ethical judgment about that friction? Is that, look, that friction exists, innovation exists, they're constantly bumping up against each other. And over time, probably innovation wins, probably. But that friction exists. Is that a bad thing? Is it a good thing? Is it a non-thing?
I think it's human. I think it's just we are hardwired to resist that change. And at some point, you either decide to opt in or opt out. I think a good example, like social media, I don't participate very often, very little. I would prefer not to have a phone in my pocket because I think it's a distraction. It takes me away from focus. However, we live in a modern world and you have no choice but to opt in. Like, you will just be completely left behind. You will, end up in a place you don't want to be if you don't opt into the wave of the tribe you decide to participate in. So I just think, if Darwin was right, those who resist it to the end will lose.
It's funny though. There's an image I'd like to just leave us with is, I remember, this is now going back a bit, but I remember when, if your company issued some kind of a smartphone or maybe a BlackBerry, if they issued it to you, it meant you were important, right?
Yeah.
There was a time when not everyone got it automatically and you didn't necessarily have it on your own. So if your company issued some sort of a communications handheld, you were important. And then there was this other level, which is, if you're really important, you don't use a smartphone. You've got like an assistant who tells you what you need to know.
Right.
So there was like the bottom, like, didn't have the smartphones. The pretty important people in the middle had the smartphones, and then the CEOs did not have a smartphone because they were too damn important for something so prosaic.
That's right.
And so, but now I would venture to guess the President of the United States and the King of Morocco probably have smartphones. I mean, there is no, from bottom to top, everyone who is connected has to be connected through a tech like that. That distinction's gone. So it's just a kind of an image I was thinking about, like how technology goes from being something that's really hard to access, like a candle or a book, to something that's totally ubiquitous, and how it changes what its value is to us, like all those books over your shoulder. I know they're valuable to you, but they're not like the pride and joy of your life. They cost $10 each and whatever.
Yeah.
So it's just funny how this technology transforms. This is what I think about a lot these days. I think about the things that transform us, that inevitably and irrevocably transform us. Like becoming a parent transforms you. I mean, everyone who's not a parent understands what parenting is, but to actually be a parent is transformative. Right?
Yes.
There are things, and there are so many things like that. And one of them is management or ownership. When you get into that role, it's transformative. When you have all that responsibility of making decisions that help customers, owners, workers, vendors, the larger world that you're in, it's a transformative kind of responsibility that, and we're in this moment with writer's strike, auto strike. The conversation does get simplified and boiled down so that we can consume it through the news and things like that. But I really do believe that the owners of, or the managers / owners of the auto companies do think about all their constituencies, all their stakeholders. They think about the planet. I think Hollywood people, rapacious as they are, try to think about everything and everyone, because that kind of responsibility is transformative.
I totally agree. And, while the technological innovation is inevitable, we are all still totally and utterly human. You don't want to see any suffering out in the world. We get worked up about things, and sometimes there's just simply no good choices, and you just make the absolute best choice that you can, because it's not always, win-win-win all the way around because of that disruption. In the long run, sort of the long lens of that, it seems to work out pretty good.
Yeah. So for the running backs, we weep for you.
For now, until some time, at some point, the tide might turn and go a different way.
And the running backs can start their own football league.
They could, and no one would watch it because it would be really boring seeing a bunch of people go 4 yards at a time.
Or they could alter the rules and make it more exciting. They have to make it to punch each other while they do it. Maybe we watch that.
Hey, if that's what it takes.
All right, Mark. Thanks for joining me on this conversation today. It's always fun to shoot the shit and discuss matters of global importance.
Yes, at least for today.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
All right, we'll see you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of What I See, where we explore the stories of the visionaries shaping our world. We hope you found insights and inspiration from our guests. Don't forget to subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode, and continue to be a part of the conversation. See you next time on What I See.